Hey guys, I'm Shay here with Shay Tech, where we make videos on all things tech, and today we're going to be building a video editing PC for us to use to edit our videos. So let's get right to it. First thing I'm going to do here is grab this case. This is actually not a new case. Most of these parts are new. A few we had laying around, one of which is the case. My wife insisted on continuing to use this piece of garbage because it's pink, which is, just wonderful. So let's go ahead and take both sides off. It's usually a pretty good thing to do. A lot of times you don't need necessarily access to both sides right away, but it will help you start to kind of see how you can cable manage. The first thing I'm going to do is put in the power supply, and actually with this case we do need both sides off immediately because both the power supply and the hard drive are going to go in on this back side. That's the way that this case is made. So for power supply, this is the other, let me see, yeah, this is the only other used part. This is from a previous build, but it's actually a really nice power supply. It's 80 plus bronze, 600 BQ, EVGA, and what's really nice about it, and I gotta say, when I found this, I didn't even know we had it. It was pretty exciting, because I never knew I owned a modular power supply, which is pretty great, because then you don't have to keep all the cables that you don't need. So it obviously comes with the CPU and motherboard main power, just standard in it, but for your SATA power and PCIe power and all of that, you can choose whether you want them in the power supply or not. So we're gonna go ahead and stick this in here. This. Nudge that down in there. We'll run the cables up in a second. Got some screws in here. That out of the bag there. And we'll start getting this screwed in. Just gonna get all of them a little bit screwed in, and then I'll tighten them all up because it's kind of at a weird angle here. This will help us to align it better. Nothing satisfying about screwing screws. There is something satisfying about working with tools. Not just screws, but screws are one that I get to do often. Okay, so I remember this case now. It's kind of annoying, but we need to go ahead and run these cables up into the main area here, and we're gonna have to get the other ones too. But I'm gonna wait to do that because we'll plug in the other cables once we've got everything else put in. So the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install the hard drive. So for storage space on here, we've got a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD that's going to get plugged directly into the M.2 slot on the motherboard. But since we're going to be editing a lot of videos, and videos are huge files, we also have a 4 terabyte desktop hard drive disk to help offset some of the storage issues that we're surely going to experience. But we also, as you probably saw in some of our first videos, have built a NAS, so that's going to be our long-term storage, but still going to need plenty of storage on the editing PC itself. So this is nice. I'm not going to actually have to screw anything in for the hard drive. It just goes in this little tray, I guess, and the tray has little plastic nodules that come out and they go in the screw holes of the hard drive, and then we just slide this back in until we hear a click. Good to go. So that's the power supply and the hard drive disk in for now. I'm going to go ahead and shove these in here to help us get this turned over. Okay, so now it's time to get the rest of the PC built. So you may be asking, well, what kind of parts are you going to be putting in there? And I will now show you. So first of all, we got this motherboard. This is an ASUS Prime B450MA, and this is actually, for what it is, it was really cheap. I think it was about 75 bucks, and it's got everything that you could possibly ask for a video editing rig. It's got all kinds of display inputs and outputs. It's got 4 regular USB 3 along with 2 Thunderbolt USB, HDMI, DVI, VGA, PS/2 for your old school mice and keyboard. It's got a few audio inputs and outputs and gigabit Ethernet. So it's pretty great motherboard for a pretty low price. It also has that one M.2 slot that we need for our SSD here in a little bit. So this is pretty great. I'm actually gonna scooch the case aside for a few minutes here. I'm gonna build some of this outside of the case here. So the first thing we want to do probably is put in our CPU. And for our CPU, we have a 3rd gen Ryzen 7. That's a Ryzen, what is it? 3800, I believe is the number. 3700X is what we've got here. Let me set this box out of the way and get this open. So the nice thing about AMD processors is that most of them, if not all of them, I think maybe Threadripper doesn't, but if you're spending that much money on a CPU chip, you probably can afford to buy a pretty good cooler. But most of them do come with their own cooling systems, which is pretty great. Can save you a little bit of money, and especially with how good AMD processors are starting to become with their Ryzen lineup. It's pretty nice to have a cooler. And we're not planning on overclocking this thing, so we are going to be using the stock cooler. It's got RGB on it too, which is kind of a cool plus. So let me get this open here. It's actually my first time using a Ryzen processor. Not AMD, but definitely first time using a Ryzen. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna go ahead and unclip that from the CPU socket holder there. Check that I aligned the gold arrow with the gold arrow on the CPU chip with the black arrow on the CPU socket. I do have those aligned, so now drop this in here. Okay, it went right in, and now I can push the lever down, click it into place. That's looking pretty great. Go ahead and close this up and get a few of these things out of the way. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and put in our RAM. So for RAM, I actually got this on a deal for Prime Day. It's $100 for 32 gigs of RAM, two 16 gig sticks, and they're Corsair Vengeance Pro, and they also have RGB on them, which is actually kind of cool. I've never had RAM with RGB. To be honest, I've never been a huge fan of RGB anyways, so I don't really have much of it in any of my builds I've ever done. But these actually, apparently, I guess we'll see when we fire it up, but they have RGB light coming out of these little white plastic things on the top here, so that's pretty interesting. I guess we'll get to see that when we're done here. So I'm going to go ahead and put a fresh one in here. Make sure to have them in the same channel here too. Okay. Yeah, that seems to be in. It used to be that one side of the RAM stick, where before there was this little divot here, was much longer than the other side. It was very easy to tell which way they went. Not so much anymore, it seems like. They're almost exactly the same size. Very little difference there. So let's get that clicked in. Looking real good. The next thing we want to do is put in our NVMe 1 terabyte Western Digital Black SSD. This thing can get read speeds of up to 3,430 megabytes per second, which is insanely fast. I mean, regular SSDs were a nice step up from hard drive disks. These are like anywhere from 5 to 6 times as fast as the traditional SSDs. It's almost kind of too much, but okay. So I've never put one of these in before. I've always used traditional SSDs, but we're gonna learn together here. I've seen enough of them put it in, and I think I know what I'm doing here. So the first thing we need to do is put this little standoff into the motherboard. I believe this is the right length. Double check that. Yes, that is the right length. Okay, so once the standoff's in, and this came in a little plastic wrapper along with the screw that goes into the standoff. Once that's in, you can plug in the SSD into the M.2 slot, and you push it down, and you get this little tiny screw, and that screws right into the standoff, and it holds it down for you. Okay, that's in there nice and tight, looking pretty good. Last thing that we need to do is put on the AMD cooler. So the nice thing about AMD coolers, like I was saying, is that not only do they come free with most AMD chips, but they also come with thermal paste pre-applied to the bottom here. So I don't need to put any thermal paste on this right now, but if you do need to add thermal paste to your cooler, it's just kind of one big dollop or dot of it that you need to push onto the CPU chip, and then you can push the CPU cooler down on it and it'll spread it out nice and easy. And we'll cut over a clip of what that looks like, so in case that you need to do that yourself. So let's figure out which way we want to put this thing. So chassis fan, CPU fans right there, so I think it's going to go this way, is what it looks like. And I'm going to, oh, is this separate? Okay, that's hooked on there, and now we can push this part down and hook it on this side. Okay, and then once you have it hooked on, you just pull the lever back. It's going to feel like pretty tight at first, but that's okay. It's supposed to be on there real nice and tight. And then we can go ahead and plug in the CPU cooler fan right away here. Looks like it's going to go right over on this header. Okay, that's in there nice and good. It also came with a couple extra things here. It looks like one of them is oh, interesting. So it's got a cable that you can use if you don't have enough fan headers to plug it into one of the USB headers. And another one's more like an extension, kind of an extension port maybe or something. Not exactly sure what this second one's about, but everything's now pretty good and set on our motherboard here. So before we go ahead and stick it into the case here, I/O shield. Definitely want to put the I/O shield in first. And in terms of putting it in the case and screwing down the motherboard, I, as I'm wont to do, pre-installed the standoffs for the motherboard because those can be kind of a pain. I don't need to bore you with that. Just make sure if your case doesn't come with pre-installed standoffs, that you go ahead and get those standoffs in before you try to screw down the motherboard, or you could potentially damage it. So the I/O shield is one of those other kind of finicky and annoying parts. Unfortunately, I didn't pre-install this one out. So you just kind of want to position it in where it goes, make sure you've got it lined up the right way and everything, and then push it into the slot so it kind of sticks a little bit. Once it's in, there we go. This one actually went in pretty nicely and actually clicked in. I've had ones that don't click in at all, and they just are painful. But once that's in, let's get some of this stuff out of the way. Once that's in, you put your motherboard in, and you again make sure that you've lined up all of your ports with the I/O shield, and you set it in. Okay, and I believe we've got 8 screws to screw in this ATX style motherboard. So we'll get right to that. Okay, so we got the motherboard screwed down. You may be thinking, well, what do we do now? And the answer would be we need to start plugging in all of these front panel cables and what have you, and then we can start thinking about power. So what have we got here? First, probably the best thing to do is plug in your main front panel cables, which is going to be for your power light, power switch, reset switch, etc. In most modern motherboards, they now actually print the pinout for where you plug these in right next to the header that they need to go in. So it's usually pretty easy these days. I'm gonna look at that. Okay, those are all plugged in. The next thing I'm gonna do is find the regular USB 2 header, or cable, and I'm gonna find the first USB header that's on my motherboard here. It looks to be right there. I'm gonna make sure I got my pins lined up. I'm gonna plug that bad boy in. Easy. Next thing is going to be our HD audio. So we're going to plug in our HD audio here. Should be easy enough. There it is. Line of our pins. Plug that bad boy in. And then lastly, we've got the cable for our USB 3.0 on our front panel, which they usually look like this in my experience. They're a little different than the other ones, but therefore also a lot easier to figure out how to plug them in. Okay, that's looking good. I'm going to move these out of the way a little bit, and that's all looking pretty good. So the next things we need to do are well, first let's plug in the fans, what fans we can. Let's see how many fan headers this motherboard has. So there's a chassis fan header right by this fan that we've got for the back of the case. So we will go ahead and get that plugged in immediately. And then we've got a fan on the front here, and I believe I did see another chassis fan header somewhere near the CPU fan header. And sure enough, there it is. So let's get that plugged in. So I'm gonna have to loosen this just a tad, get a little more slack. Let's just take this off and we'll re-cable manage at the end. Okay. Good. Kind of a tight fit. Get my hands in here, but that's how she goes sometimes. Okay, that's plugged in. That's looking real good. Okay, so the main thing that we need to do now is get the power cables plugged in and plug the graphics card in. So let's grab the graphics card. So for a graphics card, one of the most important parts for a video editing PC, obviously, we have a Geoforce RTX 2060 by Zotac. Now, this isn't the exact card I wanted, but if you know anything about PC building in recent history, there is a huge shortage of decent graphics cards. I tried to wait a little bit, nothing decent was getting in stock. We're considering using this for like about a month and then selling it used on eBay and purchasing an RTX 3070 maybe when they come out, if they actually have a good supply of them, though that's pretty doubtful. But this should get the job done. The main thing about it is that it only has 6 gigabytes of VRAM rather than 8 like the 70 and 80 models do. But it's a long step up from the laptop that we've been using to edit videos up until now. So let's go ahead and open this box up, grab this graphics card out, and get it installed. The graphics card is going to be a little annoying to put into a build, especially if it's already a cramped build, because they're usually pretty honking big, especially the new ones by NVIDIA, the RTX like 3080 and 3090. Those things are massive. This one's not too bad, but still pretty big, as you can see here. It just needs to go into one of our PCIe slots that's long enough to hold it, and I see one right there. So let's go ahead and move that out of the way, and let's go ahead and just kind of set it in, but not all the way, and see if we've got the back covers here that we need undone, which we don't. So we're going to need to take one of these out, it looks like. So let's do that first. So on more expensive cases, these are usually actually like removable and replaceable, but on our crappy cheap case here, the metal just needs to be kind of punched and twisted out, which is kind of annoying, but you know, you get what you pay for. Okay, there we go. So now I'm just going to bend it back and forth as many times as I can until it gets really loose, and I'll yank it out. Easy. So that should be looking pretty good now. Go ahead and make sure that the plastic holder for that is out all the way, which it is. Okay, and now when I push this down, I should eventually hear a click, letting me know that it's securely in place. So, and then it needs to be screwed down. So let me grab a screw for that. Okay, so we've got some screws in baggies here. I think this one should hopefully work. Hopefully being the key words. Okay, that's nice and placed there. And since this graphics card is, as most graphic cards are so big, it actually needs 2 screws. It actually gets 2 of these little metal plates yanked out, but we already had one of them out from the previous build that was in this case, so that's why I only had to take one out. Okay, so that's all in, looking really great. The last thing we need to do is go ahead and just run the power, and also we need to run a SATA data cable from the hard drive to the... Okay, so now that we got the necessary power cables run through the case there, we can start plugging them in. So the 3 that I need plugged on this side are the main power to the motherboard, 24-pin connector. It's going to go right into the only port that'll fit that many pins, obviously, usually on the edge of the motherboard. I hate these ones that are separate. I guess the smaller form factor motherboards have smaller pin announcement. There we go. Okay, that's in. I heard it click. for this CPU, we do in fact need all 8 pins clicked good. And lastly, we need dedicated power, of course, to the graphics card to power this big chunky boy. So we've got this cable right here. Very good. Okay, so this is pretty much everything except for our SATA cable. SATA data, that is. So we just need to get this run through the case. Nice and short cable A. Just got some new ones recently. And again, it doesn't really matter which SATA port you plug it into, but personally, I like to start my first drive on the first port, SATA 1 or SATA 0, depending on your motherboard is set up, and then just work my way up from there. But that's just me, and it really makes no realistic difference, so run that through. Okay, looks good. Plug that into the hard drive disk here. Really, really good. Okay, that's everything. So now we need to close this bad boy up and go ahead and see if we can get it to post. Okay, we're back. We've got the monitor hooked up, HDMI cable plugged directly into the graphics card, and everything's good to go. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on and see if it posts, if it gives us anything at all. Did we do our job correctly? Oh, I see something. I see something. It's not much, but there it is. There it is. The most satisfying part of building the PC. So I'm going to go ahead and install Windows on this later. That won't be a part of this video, but if you do have any interest in seeing maybe a guide on how to install Windows or any other video ideas, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. If you liked that video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button maybe, and that's all for this one, guys, so we'll see you next time.